his computer, and in a moment I'm going to hand over to Adrian, make him the host for the meeting, and I'm sure you'll enjoy his talk. I'm just handing over to you now, Adrian. And you are the host now.
Thank you. I assume you can all hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Hugh, and hello, Llandudno, and hello, world. From Holland and where else we got? Caergwrle and all sorts of places. So, so hello. This is my first ever Zoom talk. So heaven knows only how it will go. And it's the first time I've ever done a talk sat down. Normally I have to heave all my equipment into the front of a church hall, set it all up, look for the nearest plug socket, realize you've forgotten something. So this is a whole new world anyway. So for those of you who don't know me, I own the Homefront Museum in Llandudno. It's a personal collection of Homefront related ephemera and memorabilia that I've collected over the last 30 or so years, and I opened to the public 20 years ago. But tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to talk about Llandudno during the Second World War. So this is the point that I have to do the technology bit. So bear with me. Okie doke. Okay, can you all see that?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so as I say, I want to talk about Llandudno in the Second World War. And I don't know how much you know, but Llandudno played host to thousands of evacuees during that period. And the most well-known of those were evacuees from the Inland Revenue. They were civil servants. But to understand why Llandudno was chosen to accommodate so many civil servants, I want to go back a quarter of a century to 1914. When the First World War was declared in August 1914, it was peak holiday season here in Llandudno. As soon as the announcement was made, everyone just went home, packed up their bags and off they went. This was an economic disaster for the boarding house owners. And the council was under immense pressure to do something about it. And it was they that went to the military authorities and said, look, all this accommodation, we can take thousands of new recruit soldiers if you'll give them to us. And that's exactly what happened. And so part of the Welsh Army Corps, Lloyd George's Welsh Army Corps, was sent to Llandudno. And between November 1914 and September 1915, around 4,800 men of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers were billeted here in Llandudno. And of course, this was indeed good news for those beleaguered lodging house owners who had lost the best part of August takings. And what's interesting about this photo you can see on the screen, I hope it's big enough, is that at the front you can see an officer. I know it's sepia, but he's probably dressed in brown. But the recruits behind, they're not in khaki, they're actually in dark blue, in navy blue. And this was known as Kitchener's Blues. And so many men volunteered in August, September 1914, that actually there weren't enough khaki uniforms for them. So they went to the subcontinent, to India, and got old sort of navy blue postal uniforms. And some wags actually nicknamed them as the postman. The boarding house owners, this is Heath House, this is where the Oasis Hotel is today on the promenade. They were initially promised 3 shillings and 3pence per soldier per day. And of course, they were rubbing their hands in glee at this amount. The soldiers themselves, if they were expecting luxurious surroundings, they were sadly mistaken. All the furnishings and all the chat rooms, and they just had. So conditions were basic for them. During the day, they did drill on the promenade, they swam in the sea, they dug trenches at Happy Valley, they went on route marches over the Great Orme, and they went to Conway Morfa, where there was a rifle range, and they practiced shooting down there. Now, you might be able to see in the front row of this photograph, there's a soldier, young soldier, and he's got a black button, second one down, and it's a normal button, but it's been covered either in black paint or black crepe paper, and it's known as a mourning button, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, not as in the time of day. And soldiers were allowed to do this if they'd lost a close relative in the fighting, a mourning button, and his is painted black. Just quite an interesting picture, that. By the summer of 1915, holiday makers had started to return to Llandudno, but there was little or no accommodation for them. Now, this person who sent this postcard was lucky. They managed to find accommodation in and it's just a card to let you know we've had a nice time. The weather has been good on the whole. There are thousands of soldiers billeted. Moving forward to the 3rd of September 1939 and the outbreak of the Second World War. This is the bit I hope the technology works.
I am speaking to you from the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
I'm sure you've all heard that many times over. Neville Chamberlain came to Llandudno in 1926. He was Minister of Health in those days, and he opened the clinic on Oxford Road, which was the War Memorial Maternity Home in those days. And he died 80 years ago yesterday, in fact. Anyway, that's a complete aside. So for a number of years, the government had put plans in place that if war came, Second World War came, then government departments would move out of London, out of the cities, to the provinces. And seaside resorts on the North Wales coast were perfect choices for the government. And so the Ministry of Food went to Colwyn Bay, the Ministry of Works went to Rhyl, and the Inland Revenue came here to Llandudno. Hotels started to be requisitioned literally days after Chamberlain's speech, although the first civil servants didn't arrive until February 1940, when the first 500 turned up. The Imperial Hotel that you can see in this picture, this was used as the headquarters of the Inland Revenue when they were here in Llandudno. This is where all the top officials, including Sir William Diggins, who was the chief inspector. Special trains had to be chartered to bring all the civil servants and their millions, and I mean literally millions of files with them in order for the department to run smoothly. Now, you have to bear in mind that the seafront hotels that were requisitioned were purely for office accommodation, and the civil servants themselves and their families that came with them had to find accommodation in the smaller hotels and the boarding houses, as well as private houses, sort of behind the main drag in Llandudno, even into Deganway, Llandudno Junction, and Penrhyn Bay. Now, the civil servant responsible for finding this bed space was this man. You might not recognise him there, but you probably will there. It is Callahan, and he was the Assistant General Secretary of the Inland Revenue Staff Federation, was one of the first to be sent to Llandudno in 1939, and he became a familiar face to Llandudno. He tried to settle thousands of civil servants in their new surroundings. Many of the locals, the civil servants were simply known as guinea pigs, and that's because they paid 1 guinea a week for their board and lodgings, which was meals a day. And of course, when rationing was introduced in 1940, the landladies were very quick to take out the coupons from their ration books. Now, many of the 4,000 civil servants brought their families too, and this meant overcrowding in local schools, particularly John Bright's, and pressure on other services too. This is 7 Mostyn Crescent, and at the very top there, the top floor flat, that's where Jim Callahan lived. And he left Llandudno in 1942. That first photograph of Jim I showed you was in a Navy uniform. He joined the Royal Navy in 42. Of course, we know that he was Labour Prime Minister between 1976. A charming photo of 4 clerical assistants on and on the left is clerical assistant Humphreys, and she arrived in Llandudno from London in September 1940, and she was billeted with 11 other young women in a hostel on Lloyd Street. She worked at the Estate Duty Office, which was headquartered at the St George's Hotel, and her first task each day was to connect the morning's post to the correct office. That's what you can see in this picture here. So all the girls have got all the different files and they're running around down the promenade trying to connect the right mail to the right office. Moving further towards the Little Orme, this is the Craigslist Hydro, and this was requisitioned in 1939 and was used by the Special Commissioners of Income Tax. And some 1,200 civil servants were split between the 163-bedroomed hotel that you can see here and the indoor tennis courts, this picture, which were on the other side of the road. It's now bungalows. Now, working conditions in the Craigslist Hydro covered tennis court were not good. It was very cold in the winter, there was no heating, and the roof leaked. So many of the civil servants had to have buckets. There were also pigeons in the lofts, in the roof spaces, so they used to poo on everything. So there was little marks all over the people's. There was a couple of tragedies associated with the Craigslist Hydro that happened during the war years. In 1943, an airspeed Oxford flew into the west side of the Little Orme, and that was apparently a pilot who was showboating to his girlfriend who worked at the Craigslist Hydro. And for days afterwards, bits of the fuselage and some of the wings were washed up onto the beaches. And the other incident actually happened just after the war in 1946, when 2 civil servants were killed and 1 were injured in the Craigslist Hydro pumping station. So in this picture here, right in the centre, you see normally I've got a little pointer when I'm in my chair, point things out, but I can't here. So in the centre of this picture, you've got the Craigslist Hydro. On the other side of the main road that drops down into Llandudno, you've got that white pipeline. That is what pumped the hydrotherapy water. Just at the shoreline, you can see a little grey square building, and that was, and that is what collapsed in 1946, trapping these 3 young civil servants, killing 2 of them and seriously injuring the other. This is the Ormscliffe Hotel. Now I think it's known as the Llandudno Bay Hotel. It was the Regency Royal as well for a bit. The Ormscliffe back then, and this was converted into a recreation centre with numerous facilities for the servants. Membership costs 2p. It was an ideal place for civil servants who, let's face it, were a long way from home to socialise and make new friends. From here, clubs and societies were formed, sports tournaments arranged, and theatrical established. And talking of theatrical groups, programmes for a couple of shows, we've got the Banjo Club and we've got the Ormscliffe Dramatic Society. Sometimes the shows would take place within the Ormscliffe Hotel itself, room, sometimes at the Arcadia Theatre and also at the Pier Pavilion Theatre, which was huge. It could house seat up to 2,000 people. They also had their own in-house magazine called the Ormscliffe Gazette. Well, they had it until paper rationing was introduced, and it had to stop. Not that many copies of those. This is the County Hotel. In those days, it was known as the Craigellon Boarding House, and it was used by the grandly named Inspectorate of Foreign Colonial Dividends Department, which was now they stayed until 1948, and the property was bought by Mr. Fred Davis, who renamed it the County Hotel. Fred Davis was world snooker champion from 1948, 1949 and 1951. After each victory, he would arrive back at Llandudno railway station, trophy in one hand, winnings in the other, for a nice civil reception. Lots of well-wishers doffing their hats to him and waving them. His brother Joe was probably world snooker champion in the 1930s for many, many years. Now, I mentioned there that the county remained with the Inland Revenue until 1948, and that was the same for all the hotels. And by 1948, everyone was really quite sick of it. The civil servants themselves wanted to go home. They'd had quite enough at Llandudno that many thought was a rural backwater. They wanted the bright lights of London. And conversely, the hoteliers and boarding house owners frankly wanted rid of the civil servants because they moaned a huge amount, and they'd also only got a guinea a week for them, whereas they could make a lot more money from holiday makers. So there was quite a lot of protest from the civil servants, and they had one massive one at the Arcadia And when the estate duty office was at the St. George's, when they left in 1946, there was a mass demonstration at Llandudno railway station at the concourse itself. People even had placards, free civil servants, we want to go home. But the government didn't want to send them all back to London. They wanted to sort of redistribute the employment around the country. So they had to wait for offices to be built in South Wales, in Guildford, in Woking, in places like that. And that was the reason for the delay. Okay, so moving on, another group of evacuees that arrived in Llandudno during the war was the Variety Department of the BBC. Well, originally they were evacuated to Bristol, but when Bristol started getting bombed, they decided to move, and they came north to North Wales, to the County Theatre in Bangor and the Grand Theatre here in Llandudno. From the Grand, Sandy McPherson, the Canadian-born organist, he would play the organ for hour after hour after hour, just to fill the airwaves with music while people worked. Other programmes that were recorded at the Grand included Itmar, It's That Man Again, starring Tommy Handley and Ted Kavanagh, and the very popular. In 1944, the BBC broadcast Llandudno Half Hour, which was within the Forces programme. Local people were invited to the theatre and they were able to send messages to their loved ones who were in. Bill Sargent, and Sargent's Radio will be a name familiar to many of you in Llandudno. We had a shop on Maddox Street to start with, and later on in Lloyd Street. And as well as dealing in wireless sets, he was also an expert in public address systems. When the BBC arrived in Llandudno, they were short of both equipment and staff, because many of their staff had been called up to join the Royal Signals. And so the BBC went along to Bill's shop and said, will you help us out? And yeah, happy to help. And as well as his payment, Bill received 50 tickets for each of the shows. And all of a sudden, Bill was the most popular man in Llandudno, because everyone wanted tickets to these shows. You know, George Formby, Vera Lynn, all the huge stars of the day came to Llandudno. Sadly, you can see there a picture of Bill next to his son's grave. His son, Donny, was captured by the Japanese in 1941 at the fall of Singapore, and he was incarcerated in a prison war camp on Java, and he died literally days before the end of the Second World War. And in 1946, Bill went out to Java, to Indonesia, to find his son's grave. Entertainment was huge business in Llandudno because there was very little else for people to spend their money on. And you have to remember that all these civil servants were on London wages. So they were on, you know, big money. There's nothing in the shops to buy. So all the theatres, all the dances, all the cinemas did huge. I love the quote at the top of this, which says, entertainment in wartime is more of a necessity. So this is where I keep my fingers crossed again for a bit more technology and hope it works.
Now I go window cleaning to earn an honest bob. For a nosy Parker, it's an interesting job. Now it's a job that just suits me. A window cleaner you would be if you can see what I can see when I'm cleaning windows.
So glad that worked, because otherwise I'd have had to sing it to you. You wouldn't have liked that at all. Okay, so this performance by George Formby, it was a Sunday in September 1940, landed both him and theatre impresario Will Catlin in hot water. Now, Will was the licensee of the Arcadia, and he was summoned to appear in court charged with permitting music which was not of a sacred or classical nature. So that evening when George Formby performed, were two police officers. They were in the audience and they were listening as cheeky comedian Formby sang some of his most popular songs, including Chinese Laundry Blues, When I'm Cleaning Windows, and Leaning on a Lamppost. Now, these were deemed to be of Saturday night class, and of course, his performance was on a Sunday, and just that was just not to be. So they ended up in court, and magistrates found the case proved, but due to Will Catlin's previous good record, they dismissed the proceedings on payment of costs. Imagine that. George Formby could have been banged up here in Llandudno. The war could have been totally different. So another load of evacuees that came to Llandudno in 1940 was the School of Coast Artillery. And the government decided that with the threat of the German invasion and increased enemy bombing, that the Royal Artillery's Coast Artillery School in Essex on the Thames needed somewhere safer. And so after much searching, they went up and down the west coast of Britain to find somewhere. They chose the Great Orme at the end of Clishellig Drive. The land was duly requisitioned by the War Department from Mostyn Estates, and it was chosen because there was suitable anchorage for target ships, and there was good conditions for radio finding, radar, which was obviously the up-and-coming technology of the day. And so as well as the guns, the radar, there was also searchlight emplacements there as well. And it's said that Royal Engineers designed and planned the layout of the whole school in one afternoon with balloons bought from Woolworths on Mostyn Street. So I've got some photos here of the buildings down at the School of Coast Artillery. This first one is the Munitions Stores. So you can see they're just really glorified Anderson shelters made of corrugated steel, reinforced with timber and covered in earth. And basically a lot of the buildings were camouflaged from the air. So if the Germans had flown over, they'd have just thought it a small village. You can see at the back of the guns here, the little building that's being built, it looks like a chapel. So again, from the air, it would have looked like a small Welsh village. These guns apparently were fired very few times because they actually had no ordnance for these. So planning. These are three of the searchlight emplacements. There were two batteries of these three and the corner. And they're the other three you can still see today. And in the background, there's been so much erosion over the years. Just you can make out where the goats are, and you can also make out the steps that used to go down to side, to the right-hand side, there's a black hole, and that's one of the copper adits called cowboys. So an afternoon down at the Coast Artillery School. So here's some of the cadets loading guns. You can see Penmaen Mawr in the background there, and you can see Penmaen Mawr Mountain in its full glory before they blasted it over the last 80 years or so. The cadets would fire at static targets. There was a ship called the SS Gambira, and she was moored 3 miles north of Imperial, Puffin Island. And she's there, she still lies there today because they hit her and she sank. And they also, with the smaller caliber guns, would fire at targets towed behind motor torpedo boats and motor launches that would zip round Conway Bay, and they'd take pot shots at. And also they had anti-aircraft guns there as well, where they would practice. And they had remote controlled Tiger Moth planes known as Queen Bees. And these would take off from T. Croix, the artillery centre on Anglesey, which is now the motor racing circuit. And they would fly over Anglesey and fly over Conway Bay, again, with targets behind for the anti-aircraft gunners to fire at. Now, these targets were made locally. Many of you will have heard of Frank Tilsley, the builder. His workshops in Craigydon were one of those that were taken over to make these targets. The officers and men themselves weren't billeted at the School of Coast. So you already had all these thousands of civil servants and their families in Llandudno, and then, you know, hundreds of soldiers as well. And so they had to find accommodation in Llandudno, in some of the hotels, and again in private houses. This is outside the Gogarth Abbey Hotel, the now demolished Gogarth Abbey Hotel. And it was the officers' mess. And you can see some of the, in this photo, they've got the white on their forage caps. You've got the instructor of gunnery in white at the front, and you've got a few officers as well. So, and it seemed to be that every time a new course would start or a new intake, they would have a group photo like this taken in the grounds of the Gogarth Abbey. I've got loads of these photos, they're brilliant. These are some of the cadets actually on the site themselves. In the background there, that's the guardhouse that you can. Moving on to the top of the Great Orme, the hotel at the summit, the Great Orme Hotel. This was requisitioned by the Royal Air Force in 1939, and used as a chain home low radar station. You can see that unique antenna on the roof. And this was an Air Ministry experimental station that monitored both aircraft and surface vessel movements. It remained there until 1946. Also during the war, the greens and fairways of the golf course that surrounded the hotel at that time, which is all that area within Park Wall, if you go up on the Great Orme, a lot of this was turned over for the Dig for Victory campaign, and children, mostly boys, but some girls as well, from John Bright would be sent up there to help with the harvest, especially potatoes. They didn't get paid, but at least they got a few hours off school, so they were quite happy. And then for years afterwards, one of the RAF's Nissan huts was still seen in front of the old hotel. You can see it in this picture here. And at this time, this photo was taken about the time that Randolph Turpin and Leslie Saltz had it, and they used it to store their train. This little, they had a railway track that went round, and this is where they stored the train. So it was good that they managed to make use of Staying on the Great Orme, if you wander around up there, you'll find lots of bits of concrete. In the top left-hand corner, that is at the summit, and the other three pictures are all above the Marine Drive near the Rest and Be Thankful Cafe. Tank tracks, that corrugated road. Now these three, this concrete above the Rest and Be Thankful, this was a top secret radar college known as ADRDE, Air Defence Research Development Establishment, and it moved from Dorset in 1941 and became operational in 1942. And it was somewhere where there were about 70, 80 boffins would work, and they were absolutely instrumental in developing radar sets. And there was a ship, a boat, a yacht from Conway called the Clis Helig, and she would sail round Conway Bay and they would track her with their new radar sets. And the same with planes as well, take off from Sealand and from Valley, and they would circle round. And again, it was for the boffins at ADRDE to track and see the effectiveness of their radar. Now, ADRDE was a rather big place. Now, there's not many photos of it. This is about the only one I found, and it's that story building right in the center of your picture. It had a massive antenna on the roof that slowly turned. Again, normally I could point at this point, but I can't. But you can also make out the Marine Drive that goes round, and the buildings in the foreground just in front of Marine Drive. These are observation posts that are to do with the School of Coast Artillery. So when they were firing their big gun at that target ship, the SS Gambia off Puffin Island, they would want to see the fall of shot. And it was from those observation posts that they would do it. Now, the boffins at ADRDE were joined by two other experimental stations, the Coast Artillery Experimental Establishment, CAE, the Army love an acronym, as you know, and Telecommunications Research Establishment, TRE. And you can see, hopefully, just at the back above St. Tidno's Church, a tiny little installation on the right-hand side of this picture. CAE had their outpost. Let's come to Llandudno itself and into town. And during the Second World War, the Evanses, the Risborough and the White Heather Hotel, these were earmarked for use by the security service MI5. And this was to hide some of Britain's top double agents, as it was feared if the Nazis had invaded, then these double agents would pose a huge risk to security by passing on information. And so it was decided that they would bring them to Llandudno and also to Llanrwst and down to the Swallow Falls Hotel. And some local historians think that they were also given orders, the minders, I should say, were given orders to shoot the double agents had the Nazis invaded in order to stop them falling back into their hands. How true that is, I don't know. It's a good story anyway. Moving on to Kulak Road. So this is going up towards Holborough Gardens and the Tea Gardens. And this property, which was known as Kulak, was used by the Women's Land Army from 1944 as a holiday and rest home. And it was available to land girls who had been working hard since the outbreak of war and who needed a complete rest in April 1944, and was only one of two in the whole country. The other one was funded by an American organization called the British War Relief Society of the USA. There's a lovely picture of some of the girls. This was actually taken on E-Day, hence the couple of soldiers either side of Mae Jones, who was the caretaker. And it could accommodate 14 girls at a time, and they could stay up to 2 weeks. And it had all mod cons. It had a wireless. And the first warden was the lady in the middle, Miss Mae Jones. She welcomed over 600 land girls in her tenure during the first year. And she originally came to Llandudno for just 6 weeks to escape the bombing in London, but ended up staying 3 years. And she stayed until 1947, when the lovely named Miss Stamper was appointed in her place as the new warden. And the home remained open until September 1947, by which time 1,058 girls then joined a couple of weeks in Llandudno. So they're looking very happy there, and the dog in the front row as well. We've got some of the land girls. This is the V-Day parade going down Moston Street, Harrington Hotel in the back, Fortes that you can stay on the top right, that's still there today. Greg's or a shoe shop. Staying with sort of agriculture and the land girls, this brilliant photo is of some of the land girls that you can see. What a haystack, beauty, isn't it? And they're along with some of the prisoners of war. And they were billeted down at Pabbo Hall, which is this building that you can see here. And this was requisitioned and used as the Western Command headquarters of all prisoners of war in this area. And it was mainly an administrative centre, whereas the prisoners themselves were housed in small agricultural camps in Diganway, in Mynan, Tinnegroes, Llanrwst, Newydd, Sarn, Faenol, Four Crosses, and down at Dolgellau as well. Now, I mentioned the one in Diganway. This is an aerial shot of it. This is known as Grinneston. For those of you who know Diganway, it's just off Albert Drive, and the building in the bottom right-hand corner that you can see the roof of, that's the badminton centre that is still there today. Again, it's now bungalows, has been built on what was the... I was going to a chap who remembers playing football with the prisoners of war, Marlview Terrace, just behind the prisoner of war camp, and it was all proper sort of jumpers for goalposts. I say they played football. They had to stop when the football burst, and in Rationing hit Britain, they couldn't get another one. So that was the end of match of the day for them. Americans. So in 1944, the Yanks arrived, and in total 3 million GIs passed through Britain during World War II. So it's probably no surprise that some came here to, and indeed some came to Colwyn. Now, with accommodation in short supply, because you've now got the Inland Revenue staff, and you've got the School of Artillery, you've got ADRDE, you've got the land girls. So, you know, there was just so little room for the Americans. There was very little in that way of hotels. And so they basically were billeted in private homes and houses. And they often had to do with 5 or 6 sleeping on the floors, on bedroom floors. Now, the Americans, of course, were hugely popular for many reasons, popular amongst the local girls, of course. And they also had lots of money, nice uniforms, and they were also able to get things, you know, in Ration hit Britain. That was quite nice. And so you would find that a lot of local families would befriend a couple of Americans who would come in on a for Sunday dinner, and in return for, you know, feeling part of the family, the Americans would bring some nylons and some candy and some canned meat and things. So it was a very good reciprocal arrangement. So I mentioned earlier that the civil servants weren't overly popular in Llandudno. As I said, the Americans were. And I was talking to a lady who told me that in order to accommodate some American servicemen in their home, the children were actually moved into the shed in the garden in order to free up the bedroom so that the Americans could stay. And of course, you know, there were a few extra shillings in it, as well as this reciprocal arrangement. So you've probably heard of that phrase that was first coined by Tommy Trinder: overpaid, oversexed, and over here. But the Americans used to reply, especially to British soldiers, you're underpaid, you're undersexed, now you're under Eisenhower. As I say, the Yanks were very popular. Children would follow them around as well and sort of say, any gum, chum. This is the Drummond Hotel, and this is in Trinity Square. Latterly, the National Trust had it, and now it's an office centre called the Drummond. And this was the officers' mess for the Americans when they were here. This aerial shot, again, I can't point, how frustrating. But in the centre there, you can see the rugby posts. That was the playing fields for John Bright's, and you can just see John Bright in the trees. And this is where a lot of the Americans did their PT. And this is also where they used to play baseball. Now, to people in Llandudno, they'd probably never seen baseball before. Maybe they'd seen it in the movies, but it's unlikely they'd have seen it in the flesh. So it was an introduction to the people of Llandudno of this great new game, baseball. Just a few other things that you can see in the picture. Bottom left corner, that big square, that was the old football ground. That's where one of the many shopping meccas in Llandudno is today. That was known as the Tins, and you can see the coaches next to it. And just in front of the playing fields, you can see some Nissan huts. You might have to look very carefully. You might have to bring your phone right up to your face. And these were used by the Americans. These were where their kitchens were. And after the war, the people of Llandudno made good use of these. One of these was turned into the first Welsh school, and one of the others was used as the catering college. And that remained there until Tech, as I know it now, Llanriclo College, was opened in the 1970s. So while we talk of Americans, what is now Oriel Mostyn, well, it still was then, I suppose, the art gallery, this was the Donut Dugout, and this is somewhere where American soldiers could go for a bit of R&R, rest and relaxation. They could read Time magazine, read the American papers, drink coffee. And there's another one. This is a great photo. You can see the ring donuts right at the front there, and some of the GIs, doughboys, and interestingly, the counter in the shop of Oriel Mostyn is in exactly the same position as the counter was when it was used as the Donut Dugout. And the Donut Dugout was manned by local ladies, by local volunteers. And at the end of the day, if there were any ring donuts left, they were allowed to take them home. And the same gentleman actually who told me about playing football with the prisoners of war, his auntie worked at the Donut Dugout. And so he was one of those who benefited from these ring donuts that were surplus. And he absolutely loved it. You know, in ration hip Britain, that was a very good thing. Moving on quickly, we've got the Home Guard. This is an object of fun in TV program Dad's Army, but it was really important to domestic security. In May 1940, the Minister of War, Anthony Eden, announced on the wireless the formation of Defence Volunteers, and this photo is of the first parade. You can see they're armed with sticks. They'll be all right against the German invasion. And this is later on in the war. Churchill renamed the local Defence Volunteers, or Look Duck Vanish, as some whites called Guard, and they became into an army unit. The guy in the centre there is the most senior of the non-commissioned Home Guardsmen. He was Sergeant Major Tommy Owen, known as Tommy Sumner, because he worked for many years, well, since he was age 7. He was later awarded the MBE for his services. There's a picture of some of the Home Guardsmen at the back of the St. George's, in St. George's Place. You can see Sergeant Thomas there with the Lewis gun, and one of his colleagues has gone to check the ID papers of this car driver. This is one of the many exercises that the Home Guard did, and we've got many of the clerical assistants of the Inland Revenue in the background there looking on. Now, I mentioned, just complete aside, sorry, I keep going on and on and on, but the St. George's Hotel was taken over by the Estate Duty Office, but the bar at the back remained open, and those steps that you can see went to the bar that stayed open throughout the war. This isn't a scene you see every day in Llandudno. You've got the Home Guardsmen again, Lewis guns, Lee Enfield rifles, and you've got one very inquisitive schoolboy in the background there who's fascinated as to what's going on. They also had a band, the Home Guard. We see them here on the oval. They had a band but actually didn't have any instruments. They had to go cap in hand to Conway Town Council and plead if they could use theirs, because their band had been disbanded for the war, and they agreed but said, you better bring the same condition, have them in. So and they had their own dispatch riders as well. We've got 4 of them going down Glodaive Avenue here. The guy on the left-hand side of the picture is a chap called Jack Holmes, and he worked at Needham's Bakery in Craigllist. And he was a keen motorcyclist and put his motorbike at the disposal of the Home Guard when he formed these dispatch riders. And in 1943, he volunteered for the Royal Air Force. And there's a picture of him. He was an engineer. Now, sadly, he died in a crash in January 1945 when his Halifax crashed on Mount Kanika in Yugoslavia during a snowstorm, and he is now buried at a. Here's some more Home Guardsmen, and there's a couple of youngsters right at the back there. You can see one Lee Enfield rifle sticking up in the air. That's been held by a lad called John Gatley. Next to him, the other young lad just to his right is another, is a Cum Place lad called Gwilym Evans. And they were both in the Home Guard, but when they reached the age of 19, they both volunteered for the there's a close-up of them both. So unfortunately, John Gatley died of pneumonia in 1942, and he's buried on the Horm. He joined the Royal Navy. And Gwilym Evans there died out in the Far East. He was with the Dorsetshire Regiment. Died in May 1944, and he was just 19 years old. So for those of you who live locally, live in Llandudno, I'm sure many of you have entered the town via Diganway, and you've probably gone past Maesty Golf Club. And if you look closely at their wall, you can see big holes in it, loopholes, or stepped embrasures. And these were put here in 1940 and would have been somewhere that the local Home Guard would have fired their rifles and machine guns from had the Germans invaded to try and slow down an enemy advance. And there was a great fear that the Germans would actually invade through Neutral Island. And Hitler muted the idea a couple of times, actually. And so they set up these stop lines across North Wales from Fairborn down near Dolgellau there all the way up to the north coast with a mixture of anti-tank blocks and barbed wire and pillboxes and stepped embrasures like this. And there were some pillboxes locally. There was one certainly down at Penrhyn Bay. This lasted until the 1950s when they reconfigured the road and with the cedar fences, and there were others at West Shore. The only bombs to fall on Llandudno were on the night of May the 30th and 31st in 1941, and around 5 to 3 in the morning, a German bomber came over, probably either on its way or on its way back from Liverpool, and it just jettisoned its ordnance to lighten its load. It may have been intercepted. These bombs landed mainly harmlessly at on Nantagama, and that's one of the craters there. There was much excitement amongst local schoolboys who rushed up there in order to try and get bits of shrapnel for their collection, which was a great currency during the war. Wars, of course, are very, very expensive, and to pay for it, the government needed the British people to stick their hand in their pocket. And in every town and city, war savings centres were set up, including one in Llandudno. This is in St George's Place, and I remember this as Horesh, where I used to get my jeans from. But now I think it's a chip shop, which is called St George's Place, in fact. So they opened this in April 1941, and they sold national certificates, defence bonds and savings stamps. And outside was this huge totalizer, very sort of Blue Peter. And every time they reached the target, it would go up a bit, it would go up a bit and go up a bit more. And in total, the people of Llandudno raised £3,825,100 in war savings in the war. Now that equates to about £110 million today, which is pretty impressive. And especially when you consider the population of Llandudno in 1940 was about 16,000 people. Now, I do appreciate that it was bumped up somewhat by all those civil servants, so probably about 21,000 people. But as I said earlier, there wasn't anything else for you to spend your money on. So, you know, you really were encouraged to do your bit and put your hand in your pocket and save. One way of raising money was to have specific national savings fundraising weeks. These included Warship Week, which was held in November 1941. And a target of £137,000 was set, enough to buy a Royal Navy minesweeper. And this target was easily surpassed when £222,000 was raised in just 1 week. The ship was named HMS Llandudno, and she was launched in 1941, but ironically never visited the town that raised money to pay for her. Her finest hour came on D-Day in June 1944, when she helped sweep and clear some of the channel of mines so that the landing craft could get onto the beaches. A special plaque was given to the people of Llandudno, and this still hangs in the town hall today, and this was in recognition of this £220,000 that they'd raised. There were other national savings campaigns as well. So we had Tank for Attack in 1942, Wings for Victory in 1943, and Salute the Soldier Week, which took place in June 1944, which coincidentally was the same week as D-Day, as the D-Day landings. Now, for many, the highlight of Salute the Soldier Week was a gunnery exhibition, which was at Rosville Garage on Oxford Road, and also the site of all those American soldiers who were here in 1944. They joined in a massive parade that went down the promenade. The organisers sought to raise £200,000, which was enough to equip 1 battalion of infantrymen, 1 medical unit and 1 parachute battalion. But again, the public didn't disappoint, and over £400,000 was raised in that 1 week alone. Now, this is a pin badge, Salute the Soldier. These were sold for just a penny or so, and it all helped with the fundraising. And I think, yeah, there we are. There's the War Savings Bakelite plaque that, again, still hangs in the town hall today, which salutes all those townspeople who donated to the cause. Let's have a little film.
Now it's winter, you want to watch the children if you don't want them to catch colds. The under 5s are entitled to cod liver oil, while the under 3s can get cod liver oil and orange juice too. It's ready and waiting, so come and get it.
I'm sure some of you remember cod liver oil and concentrated orange juice and the like. Well, these items were available under the Vitamin Welfare Scheme, which allowed free or inexpensive orange juice, cod liver oil. Now, to get these items, people went along to the local food office. And in the early years of the war, this was at the town hall. But with all the other things going on at the town hall, they decided to move it out, and they moved it to Walsall House on Chapel Street. Rationing started in 1940 and went on until July 1954, so 14 years. It was went on a long time, and meat was the last thing off. So you had the food office at Walsall House, but you actually collected your ration books on the other side of the road, at the back of Ebenezer Chapel there. With nearly 20,000 people in Llandudno by surname. So ABC went on one day and DEF on the other. And this happened twice a year because your ration book only lasted 6 months. So it was a huge logistical and administrative challenge. Fair play. So the war ended in Europe anyway, on the 8th of May 1945, and it's known as VE Day. This brilliant photograph is of locals and inland revenue staff all celebrating together on the promenade. As soon as the announcement was made, there was impromptu parties really, and an impromptu parade, and it was led by the town band. And Winston Churchill's speech was broadcast live at 3 p.m. from the balcony of the town hall. Bonfires were lit on the beach and on the Little Orme and on the Great Orme that night, and basically it was one very big party. And in the following weeks, there were lots of victory parties, street parties around Llandudno. So this one is of Taliesin Street, which is opposite. And the little girl you can see on the right-hand side, in the right-hand picture at the back, her name's Pat Meredith, and she was the victory queen, resident of the street. She was chosen because her father had been killed during the war. He was in the local battery of the Royal Artillery, and he was killed. Many of the street parties had these victory princes or queens, and they were usually the children of somebody who had fallen in the war. Another one, this is on Bridge Road, again in May 1945. Tables are out, and people pooled all their ration coupons to try and put together good. This one's in Cum Place, blurred photo. I like the couple of boys at the back there. There's one there who's obviously been told to, you know, stand up straight for the photo to be taken. And this one might be VJ Day, actually. I'm quite sure of the date, but this is in Mowbray Road. And VJ Day, Victory over Japan Day, wasn't as wildly celebrated as VE Day had been a couple of months earlier. There was a huge bonfire built at West Shore, and officers from the School of Coast Artillery School went along and burnt an effigy of Tojo, who was the Japanese. Searchlights from the School of Coast Artillery lit up the sky. Blackout had ended by that time, obviously, and with big V for victory in the sky, which must have been an impressive sight and probably visible from Anglesey and Penmaenmawr, Llanmabeccan. And it wasn't until 1957, and it was May 1957, on the 12th anniversary of VE Day, that the names of the 124 Llandudno men who were killed in the Second World War, the plaques naming the 212 men from Llandudno who were killed in the First World War. So I've gone over by 3 minutes, Hugh, I'm really sorry. But that is your quick romp through Llandudno during the Second World War. Now, at this point, I have to hand back to Hugh, and he might have to remind me how I do it. Let's do that. Do that.
Can you hear me, Adrian?
I can hear you now, Hugh.
Okay, can you see if you move your pointer to...
I think
He's done it, Hugh.
I've made you host, Hugh.
Marvellous. Thank you very much. Okay, I was wondering now, we've got 5 or 10 minutes left. If anyone has any questions for Adrian, you'd like to post them in the, or comments or additional more memories, please post them through chat if you like. I think compliments, compliments more than questions. We'll just wait for a minute or two to see if anything comes through. What happened to the HMS Llandudno? Yeah, well, what happened to HMS Llandudno, Adrian?
Okay, so HMS Llandudno was sold shortly after the war, and she was scrapped in the early 1950s. So, so a sad end to a lovely minesweeper. I think I believe Llandudno Museum had a scale model of her at one time.
Well, we still do actually. I noticed it had come back. I think it's recently come back from storage, and I saw it in the museum a couple of weeks ago. I think so. It'll be on display there when we reopen in the new year, I hope. Let's see, is there any more questions here?
Yeah, there's one just gone through. I don't know how to get back. Asking what happened to the Nissan hut on the top of the Great Orme. I've no idea. I assume that it was just demolished and it's all now been landscaped in a kiddies playground up there. So I don't know what year that went, but presumably shortly after Randolph Turpin and Leslie sold it, I assume, but I don't know is the honest answer.
It's a question about the Homeguard platoons there, Adrian.
Right, number of platoons. Well, that's tricky, but there were 4 companies, so you do the maths, Morgan. So yeah, you had A, B, C, D. A guarded pretty much the Great Orme, B the centre of town, C Craigydon, and D out towards Penrhyn Bay and as far up as Glanwithen and Bryn Puddow.
Chris is asking about the buried huts on the Little Orme. I think those the munitions storage. Are they? No, on the Little Orme. I beg your pardon. Right.
On the Little Orme. Okay, so on the Little Orme, as well as the Coast Artillery School on the Great Orme, you had a practice camp on the Little Orme. There's very little left. I mean, a lot of it's gone into the sea because of the coastal erosion that's gone on. And it's really hard to work out what is limestone quarry building on the Little Orme and what was built for the practice camp of the Coast Artillery School. They were taken down pretty much the same time as the ones on the Great Orme, which was a lot of those weren't demolished until the 1970s, and it was part of a employment scheme, sort of a labour, a job creation scheme, and so they went in sort of the 1970s.
Ian is asking, was the Vardra or I'll promote the book in a moment. Ian's asking, was the Vardra or Coombe Mountain used during the war?
Okay, well, yeah, both were. Interestingly, the Vardra came under Conway and Deganway and Llandudno Junction's Home Guard. And so they used it. I mean, it was obviously a great place for an observation post to look at. Coombe Mountain's interesting because that's back in Llandudno. And the Home Guard decided that it was a pretty grim place on a cold, wet winter's night. So they decided to drag one of the old bathing huts from the beach all the way up to the top of Coombe Mountain in order to get a bit of shelter, which was a great idea until, of course, the wind blew and they managed to blow it away to smithereens. And so they replaced it actually with a rough stone-built shelter, which they used to sit in and observe what was going on. I'll come to Paul's
question about the U-boat rendezvous. I know you'll know the story of that.
Yeah, well, this is actually a First World War story. So this is in 1915. We had there was a German prisoner of war camp at Llansannan, Dyffryn Aled, and on a night in August 1915, 3 German POWs escaped. They'd already, through Christmas cards, set up with the German High Command a rendezvous on the Great Orme, and so they escaped from Llansannan. They walked the 20-odd miles into Llandudno. They hid up on the Great Orme, and for 3 consecutive nights waited for this U-boat to come in. And the U-boat was there. The German officers were there, but they couldn't see each other because of a limestone buttress. And so the German POWs mistakenly thought that the U-boat wasn't coming for them, and so they gave up. They came back into town. They tried getting a train to London, but they got captured and got taken back to Llansannan. So that's a First World War story rather than a Second World War story. But leading on from that, if you are interested in the U-boat story, there's lots more about it. Okay, Llandudno's military heritage. It's not just about First and Second World War, it's about lots of pre-20th century history stuff as well. Peter Johnson wrote the pre-20th century history stuff. I wrote about the Boer War, the First World War and the Second World War, which, to be fair, does take up the majority of it. The book is available from all good booksellers for £14.99. However, I can sell it to you for the bargain basement price of £12.50. So if you are interested, then contact me either by Facebook, the Homefront Museum page, email info@homefrontmuseum.co.uk, or if you didn't get any of that, I'm sure if you contact Llandudno Museum, they will forward your email on to me and we can sort something out. Free local delivery, but if you don't live locally, delivery is £2.50 in the UK. If you live further afield, I don't know. I'll have to go down the post office with my mask on.
Great. Thank you very much, Adrian. I think we'll have to wrap up the questions there. Thank you very much for contributing, everyone. I think we have a couple of questions and comments left over, so we can perhaps post those up on our Facebook page, Llandudno Museum's Facebook page, and Adrian and anyone else who can help answer them is very welcome to chip in. Very importantly, from our point of view, somebody asked earlier, can I find it? No, I can't immediately. So somebody very kindly gave me a nudge about how can people make a donation to the museum, to Llandudno Museum, that is, because we had said that this is a free talk, but we do welcome donations. We are in the process of setting up a sort of donations page. We were hoping to get it done ready for tonight, but that wasn't possible. So we will be setting it up very, very shortly, and it will certainly be by the time we do another one of these, but in a few weeks' time. But if you can't wait that long, please don't hold back. We really do welcome your donations, and they'll be going towards the excellent community and education programs that Diane is running, and I'm sure she'll tell you about those some other time. So I'm going to wrap up now. Firstly, of course, thanks very much indeed to Adrian for an excellent talk, and it's just brilliant that despite the very good difficult conditions that we're living under at the moment, they've been a spur in a way to help get stories like this out to an even wider audience. And you know, technology has moved on so quickly, it's helping us get our story out in different ways, if you like. Thanks very much indeed, Adrian. Thank you to all of you who've come and for your questions and comments. Our next online talk will be on the 11th of December at 6. We'll be putting it up on the Facebook page if it's not already there. When our volunteer Graham Morgan will be talking about Holy Llandudno. He'll be talking about some of Llandudno's fantastic churches and telling some stories of the great characters and some of the great community initiatives that have emanated from them. And then just before Christmas, on December the 18th, at 6 in the evening, we'll be having a storytelling event. Aaron Thomas will be reading us A Man's Christmas in Wales, which is a portrait of Dylan Thomas as an older boy, a reimagining of Dylan Thomas's iconic story, A Child's Christmas in Wales. So I hope you can join us for those. And until then, thanks Adrian once again. Thank you all very much for coming. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.
Diolch yn fawr.